Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to your online class. And I have already uploaded 3 videos of this chapter, what will be discussed today. Reproduction in plants, chapter 12 from your NCERT book Science. This is from your biology portion. And there I have uploaded 3 videos, one about reproduction in introduction, then asexual mode of reproduction. There was 2 class of asexual mode of reproduction. In one class I have discussed vegetative propagation, how vegetative propagation takes place with different vegetative parts of plants with examples. Okay, and also with some diagram I have shown you. And in the next class I have discussed about budding, fragmentation and spore formation. Have you watched the videos, students? Have you watched those? Okay, very good. Now today I am going to discuss about sexual mode of reproduction. As we have already learned that there is a difference between sexual and asexual mode of reproduction. What is the main difference between I think yes, I will again explain it. Just what is the main difference between sexual and asexual mode of reproduction? In sexual mode of reproduction there is involvement of both male and female gamete from male reproductive part and female reproductive part. Okay, so there is involvement of both the male and female reproductive part, and the formation of gamete after the fusion of male and female gamete takes place in case of sexual reproduction. Understood? And as we know, flower is the reproductive part of a plant and the most attractive part, and it having so many parts of it, as you know, sepals, petals, then stamen, then pistil or carpel. These all, among these all, stamen is the male reproductive part of a flower, and pistil or carpel is the female reproductive part of a flower. Okay, up to this portion everyone clear? Any problem up to this portion? I think I will tell you after this class, after completion of the topic, today's topic. Okay, any problem up to this portion? Okay, now I'm going to discuss about, as I have told you, there are mainly 2 kinds of reproductive part. One is male reproductive part and female reproductive part. In male reproductive part, you know, there is presence of stamen in plants, and in female reproductive part there is presence of pistil or carpel in female reproductive part of a plant. Now on the basis of presence of those reproductive part present in those flowers, the flowers can be divided into 2 categories. Okay, flower can be divided into 2 categories. One is unisexual flower, and another is bisexual flower. Okay, bisexual flower. Now, what is this unisexual flower and bisexual flower? The term itself saying unisexual, uni means only single reproductive part here. Means the flower which possessing only one reproductive part of a plant, just like maybe that may be male reproductive part or female reproductive part, but only one, means only one part, that must be male or female. So the flowers which contains either only pistil or only stamen are called unisexual flower. Understood this portion? Any problem? Unisexual flower? No problem? Okay. Now what are the example of unisexual flower? Corn, papaya, cucumber, these all are example of unisexual flower. Corn, papaya. Okay, so these are example of unisexual flower. Now comes to bisexual flower. Bisexual, it's from the definition we can able to see bi means two, means where in the flowers both the reproductive parts are present, with male reproductive part and female reproductive part both. So there must be presence of both stamen and pistil in a bisexual flower. Please mute your microphone. Sakshi, mute your microphone. Now flowers which contain both stamen and pistil is called bisexual flower. Okay, there are so many examples you can see, just like rose, petunia. These are example of bisexual flower. Rose, you can write rose, petunia. These are example of bisexual flower. Okay, I hope you understood this. Now comes to the picture of male and female gamete, male and female reproductive part. From class 6 you are just familiar with this picture. I am rubbing this portion. As you know that this is a stamen, figure stamen, no, figure stamen. This is a figure of stamen. There, this part is called anther, and this long portion is called as filament. Now this anther possesses pollen grains, and these pollen grains from after anther contains pollen grains which produce male gamete. This anther contains pollen grains, and these pollen grains they actually which they produce male gametes in the male reproductive part. Okay, so here I have drawn this picture of stamen, that is male reproductive part of a flower. Now comes to female reproductive part. I am just drawing this portion in this side. Female reproductive part figure is just like this. And there you can see this is the stigma part. Stigma is the main reception part from where pollen grain is actually reached here, and pollen grain just adhere to this portion of stigma, and that make a tube in this portion, and that will come along come inside the pistil, and further they will go to the ovary structure, and this structure is known as style, stigma style, and this portion is known as ovary. Okay, inside ovary, if we cut it in a transverse section, then we can see there are presence of ovules present in the both side. These are called ovules. So there we can see in the ovary presence of ovules. Okay, now ovary contains one or more ovules. Okay, so I hope you understood this picture. There I have drawn a male and female reproductive portion of this flower. Now comes to the point, that is, as I have already told, that male reproductive part anther that contains pollen grain that produce male gamete, and a pistil contains stigma, style, and ovary, and ovary contains one or more ovules, and the female gamete or the egg formed in an ovule, and in sexual reproduction male gamete and female gamete they fuse together to form a zygote. Okay, so what is zygote? In sexual reproduction, the fusion form of male and female gamete is known as zygote. Understood everyone? Any portion up to the any problem up to this portion? You can tell me what is zygote. Understood na? Okay, very good. Now comes to the point, that is pollination. Now how this reproduction takes place? Pollination. Pollination means, as I have already told you, the anther of the pollen, anther that possesses pollen grains or the male gametes, that pollen grains which produce the male gamete, that anther having pollen grains that produce male gamete, that anther must be reached to the stigma of the ovary, so that the male gamete and female gamete must fuse together to form a zygote. So this is the way how this transfer of pollen grains from the anther of stamen to stigma of pistil takes place. This is called as pollination. Understood everyone? Any problem? Any problem up to this portion? So what is pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from the anther of a stamen to stigma of a pistil is known as pollination. As you know that the pollen grains, they are very light in weight, so they can easily be carried away by wind and water, and they also have a hard protective coat in them. Pollen grains have a tough protective coat which prevents them from drying up. Okay, now you must have seen in the legs of insect there is presence of yellowish color pollen grain. No, these are actually pollen grains. Please mute your microphone. Shobhik, mute your microphone. Okay. Now, insects visit flowers, carry away pollen on their bodies, and some of the pollen lands on the stigma of the flowers of the same kind. Means if a plant bears so many flowers and the pollination takes place within a same plant or the same flower of a single plant. Means if a plant having the unisexual flowers or bisexual flowers, some pollen grains are just carried away by those insects, and these are actually reached to the stigma of the pistil of the same plant. Then it actually happens within a single plant, and that is known as self pollination. Mean if the pollen lands on the stigma of the same flower or another flower of the same plant, then it is known as self pollination. And when it occurs within the different flower of the same kind of plant, then it is known as cross pollination. I hope you understood this portion. In the figure 12.10 you can see that stigma and anther both are present in a flower that is bisexual flowers. When the pollination takes place within the same flower or the same plant's flower, then it is known as self pollination. And when this transfer of pollen grains from anther of stamen from one plant's flower to another plant's flower of the same kind to the stigma of the ovary or stigma of the pistil is known as cross pollination. Okay, I hope you understood what is self pollination and cross pollination. So in cross pollination, when the pollen of a flower lands on the stigma of a flower of a different plant of the same kind, it is called as cross pollination. So I hope you understood the basic differences between cross pollination and self pollination. And these pollen grains, how this zygote is actually formed. If I again try to draw the picture of ovary, sorry, ovary not, this is a picture of pistil, then pollen grain comes to this portion. Actually pollen grains under microscope, this looks like this type of structure, and this is a pistil of a flower, means female reproductive part, you know. Then this pollen grain, this is called pollen grain, that is germinating actually, okay. And these germinating pollen grains, and as you know, inside the ovary there is presence of ovules, okay. Presence of ovules, and there is only presence of one ovary here, so an ovary with nucleus. And after this picture there will be formation of tube in the pollen grain, so that it can migrate towards the ovary, okay, and that will be fused with the ovum to make a zygote, okay. So here the picture will be that will make a tube, and this nucleus will migrate and there is already presence of a ovule, and that tube enables the migration of nucleus of this pollen grain to this with this female to this ovary, and here both male gamete and female gamete both are present, and they will fuse together to form a zygote. So this is called zygote. They will fuse with each other to form a zygote. Understood this picture? Any problem, students? Any problem? So the cell which results after fusion of the gamete, this is called as zygote, and the process by which the fusion of male and female gamete takes place, or the formation of zygote takes place, this is known as fertilization, and this process is known as fertilization. Understood? Fertilization. Fertilization. I hope you understood. And the zygote develops into an embryo. After this, their developmental stage will be embryo. After zygote, it will form a embryo. Okay? I hope you understood. If you have any problem, you can ask me now. Okay, students?